As we go into the store to get the cereal, we pass his house, and he's saying his friend lives here. So when it said his friend lived there, I looked and there was nobody our age on the stoop. But he said his friend lived there. We went to the store, the corner store, which is Tip Top. Got some cereal, came back by, and then passed the house again. There was some grown-ups sitting on the stoop, but there was nobody else. So on that trip, went to Disney World, went to Busch Gardens, Gatorland, a few other places. I think we even went to Nassau. And this was on the trip that I also met another aunt we called Rosester, but her name turned to be Rosetta Enoch. And I remember she gave us a astronaut flight suit for Christmas. And like I said, it was this house back in 1991 that I ended up buying while looking for a dog, a lost dog. I put an ad in the paper, Bull Mastiff, and I had left the gate open in my yard coming back from Heroes, a nightclub in Eatonville. And I didn't find the dog, but someone called and said they had information, or they thought they had the dog across town, which I didn't believe they did. But I said, let me go anyway. So on the way down coming from Snowflake, Americana Boulevard, southwest side of town, I came down Anderson Street. When I came down this street, I said there was a for sale sign on the house. So when I saw the house, I drove back to where the dog was at, and the dog wasn't my dog. So I came back by this house, stopped, took a look at it, saw the for sale sign, and then decided to go ahead and buy it. So I went to the realtor, and she told me the story about it, that the woman from the original family still owned the house, and that she tried to sell it a few times, but she had to take it back. So I decided to go ahead and buy it. So it was about $35,000, so I gave a 9,026 was a balloon payment due in 5 years. That was 1996 that it was, the balloon payment was going to be complete, or due. So after buying the house, I started working on it. And one day my cousin came by, Jerome, asked him did he want to help work on the house. He said yes. So he got to working in the house, and then he says, I remember when my friend lived here. So it was that point that I remember this house was the house I was shown when I was 10 years old on my first trip to Orlando on Christmas. And so we thought it was a big coincidence. And at the same time, the realtor did tell me that the house was built by the first black postal carrier in Orlando, the Maxie House. So I didn't want to make this house a rooming house, because everybody who bought it pretty much made it a rooming house. I wanted to make it a single family home again. So what I did was I built the house. I redid the house and took the floors out, put new wood floors in, did everything I could to bring it back up to its original condition. And so after doing all that, put a fence around it. People around it liked it. The man next door, he had a house that needed to be redone, so he had his house knocked down and had that house built up. And they started building houses over here on this street, just based on what they were doing there. And the woman across the street, which was her husband, the one that had his house built over again, she had her house painted the same color my house was painted, because she liked it, and people come around and everybody wanted to see, because they had lights on it and everything else. It was kind of comparable to what was across the street over there on the other side of the bridge. And once I was done, I rented it out, but then I rented out to one person, like a single family. I wasn't having no room and house situation here. And I thought about moving in it, but I wanted to have a garage in the back, but so I didn't. I just stayed where I was at on Snowflake. And I always thought that I would move down here, I would have to put like a garage apartment in the back, something more to it. But what ended up happening was back in 1996, after the balloon payment was about due, I was about to pay it off, and at the same time, it was after the Million Man March, and Minister Farrakhan was in town. He was actually doing a speaking at the Lake Buena Vista to some black doctors, and brother Steve X and Howard X, who were like in charge of the Orlando area. I met him at the airport coming back from the Million Man March in 1995. And so we all got together and talked about doing something here in Orlando. So as we got together, we kind of started to communicate more. And one day back in May, after 95, the following year, in May 1996, he had called me and told me the minister was in town. He's looking for a place. If you find a place or a church, he'll be able to speak. So we went around looking for a place to all the biggest churches that we can find, black churches in the neighborhood or in the area, but nobody would let him use the place. So eventually, for 2 days of riding around, he was ready to go. I decided to go ahead and take some money, which was the money, part of this money that I was going to pay the house off with, and rent out the Tupperware Theater. So I took the money, $4,000, plus another $8 cost to advertise on 1 or 2 jams, and I used the money to buy or to get the time for Tupperware Theater on 441 in Kissimmee. So after that situation happened, I got the money back because they collected most of the money back. People gave checks and everything like that. So I just took the money, put it in the bank, and then I paid the house off with the rest of the money itself. Because I only owed back that time probably about another $10,000 because I had paid off most of it on it. So by the end of May, I had paid it off. So coming to October, no, not to October, it would have been August, I put up a sign in Orlando from a dream I had earlier, a year earlier in August, on August 11th, 1995, and again August 11th, 1996. So it wasn't until September 1996 when I realized that this house, along with 4 other houses across Orlando, were referencing stars in Orion, 5 stars. So when I noticed this house was included in this, I had to go back to what made me come get the house, because this house is the oldest house out of all the houses besides this one and the house on Elderberry. And when I noticed that this house here has the obelisk pillars in the front. You see here, obelisk pillars. And this house is French design, colonial design. And again, being built by the first black postal worker in Orlando, or postal carrier, which his government job would have been, his employer would have been the United States government, which goes back to Washington, D.C. So here's a house that was connected to Washington, D.C. because the employee was an employee of Washington, D.C., post office. So just as you see on the post mailbox, you'll see the eagle. So here it goes back to connecting to Washington, D.C. But again, as I said, this house here is connected to the layout of Orion, Stargate, as I said. And you can see when I told the city when I came home in 2008, and I went back to try to fix the house and get it back to where it was supposed to be, because it had some fines on it after the hurricane in 2005. And then my sister was staying here, and she had words with one of the code enforcement people that came here because of, they were called about some issue about locks on a door or something. So then they started nitpicking. So by the time I got home in 2008, I was coming to fix the house, and they told me as long as I had a permit on it to do work on it, then they wouldn't mess with it. So I did. I had got a permit, went downtown, and I was here every day and working on the house. So it wasn't until like 2010 to when they decided to foreclose on it, right in the middle of me doing, putting money in the house. We had a realtor, or not a realtor, but a broker, who was supposed to be a contractor. Actually, a contractor who was supposed to be fixing in the house, a black contractor, who ripped off my mother for $27,000, pretending he was fixing the house, which that made it even worse. So by the time I got home, I'm fixing up the house with Home Depot credit cards, which I couldn't get the floor inside because the floors needed to be from a special place. But I tried to get it to where I can get into the house, but I couldn't get back in until I got it livable, because it wasn't livable when I got back. So they decided to go ahead and foreclose in 2010. So I went and told them that this house is a very special house. Not only is it the house built by the first black postal carrier in Orlando, but it's significant because the house told another story behind it. Usually you have a house inside where it's telling you a story inside the house, but here's a story outside of the house. Meaning that you go in a house, you hear about haunted houses and things, but here's a house that actually took Orlando itself. So when I told them about the house, they ended up putting the fence around it. The house next door, there's no fence around it. The house over there, there's no fence around it. So this house here itself sits here, rotting away, as if it's nothing, forgotten, but there's a story behind it, a story behind the story. So when I talk about the story of the house, showing it is connected to stars laid out on Earth, now we're talking about NASA. Now we're talking about something that most people would never even consider to be relevant or actually factual. Because why? Because we're told that things happen in scenarios that if we don't get it, if somebody can't tell it the way they want to hear it, it's not relevant, it's not true. But here's a house that sits in a neighborhood that's neglected pretty much, like most black neighborhoods across the country, or even countries, is neglected, but there's something here, there's an energy here. Because like I said, you see that obelisk structure. These same obelisk structures are in the Millennia area, which goes into the Millennium Mall at Millennia, which is all connected. The reason why I can say it goes back to the time of ancient Egypt, because like I said, I met a woman named Rosetta Enoch. And when you look at the word Rosetta, you go to Rosetta Stone. Then you go to Enoch, and you look at Enoch and the story behind Enoch. And I said what made it significant to me was the fact that she had given me that astronaut jumpsuit or flight suit when I first came here. I didn't see this house back again when I bought it in 1991 as being the only house I remember being shown when I was here, and then buying it, and then showing the house that is connected to something that takes to a story that goes back past the United States, past the St. Augustine, past the Fountain of Youth. And as you can see, what's hanging up there inside the wall, on the side of the wall there, outside. A dog. A dog, I would say, almost kind of has the resemblance of the Bull Mastiff I said I was looking for when I ended up buying this house. In a Santa Claus suit. Going back to when I first came and saw this house, which was in Christmas. And then here we go again. As I said, the house itself, the energy. If you look at the shape of this house, you can see that it has the gate. The gate itself has 5 angles, 5 sides. So they made it this way, even though the yard is straight over, they decided to make the gate. They decided to make the gate an angle, so that gave it 5 angles, 5 points. So when you got 5 points, what do you have? You have a pentagon, pentagram, or star. So here it is, they put a gate around it after telling the story about a star gate that creates a star in a gate. And then across the street, as I said, these houses here didn't exist until I had this house built. Had this house redone. And they motivated to put these houses over here because of the fact that the area seemed like it was coming up because of what I was doing. And you can see here that on the street, you see the sign that says FAR. See, Paramore. The Historical National Registry District is this house. This is what gives it historical meaning in the area. This house. And if you see that the street that they put on there is called FAR. So I said on one end, there's a street called Orion Court on one end of the houses, which is Shoney to Orion. Here, when you say the word FAR, FAR is a distance. The spelling may be different, but the pronouncing is the same. And you say that house, showing you that when I say Orion, when I say a stargate, when I'm talking about a distance in time, the time itself that I saw the house from when I was a child to the time that I ended up buying it, that's a far distance, far in time. I came from a far distance when I came down here from Orlando, from New York, West Babylon, Long Island, to Florida, the far distance. And then I'm showing you a house that's connected to a layout of stars that connected to Orion, a place far away, distance. And then you see Orion Court on the other end of FAR. So it's telling you a story right here in Orlando that most people would never even consider relevant because of where it's at, or maybe who's telling the story. But since it was Disney World, and you go to Disney World, you'll hear, when you wish upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. That's what I'm talking about. Another thing, when I mentioned that the house, I owe $26,000 on it. And it was built in 1924. It was 1996. 1996 from 1924, 72 years. So 72 years, when you look at the stars and you look at the movement of the stars, the sun and the earth, that is 1 degree in a 26,000 year period, 72 years. So it takes 72 years to make 1 degree movement in the celestial step across the whole universe, or the universe itself, with the sun and the earth traveling through the universe, through all the constellations, all the zodiac constellations, 360 degrees, 1 degree, 72 years. So this 72 years from 1924 till then. Also, it was 2 years after the opening of the King Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt, which I went to Egypt in 1996, in December 1996, after this, seeing this, for a few other things that happened. But here again, the house itself, showing you that the timing itself was just perfect. 72 years that it came to my attention. And as you can see, they'd rather let it sit here and rot. Just as they had those other places where they got these empty lots. Instead of having people buy them, local people, get the neighborhood back to a good condition, they'll rather keep these lots empty so they can do gentrification here. So they don't want to have it where you own property here. They want you to rent. It's like they did over at the villages. They'd rather build apartment buildings so you can rent them out, give you some low income. But what are you going to build wealth with low income rents? Where's wealth ever come out of renting? So this is what happens. They didn't want to see somebody own it and then have a story to tell with the house behind it. They'd rather let it sit here and rot, because we're dealing with the spirit of jealousy. And you show something like this, and you got something to say, it's a spirit of jealousy, because you're not answering to anybody. You're not talking about begging for anything. I didn't ask them to give me a dime to build this thing or to renovate it. I did everything out of my pocket. I didn't owe a dime on it as far as the house. Didn't owe a dime on it as far as taxes. It all became from a fine which they could have easily dismissed, because obviously there was nothing important about why they had to take it, because of the fact they haven't done nothing with it. So here I'm telling you that how the house itself, they took the house, but the house actually took Orlando. So you can see the obelisk itself there. Same color. When I painted them white, I wasn't thinking about Washington, D.C. and the obelisk in Washington, D.C. I wasn't thinking about the fact that I can go to New York and the obelisk in Central Park and show a connection to that. But it's all here. This is the real attraction. Of course, it's not legitimate because it hasn't been pretty much backed up, or somebody's not saying it's okay to be an attraction or something that people should come look at, and why is it in the condition it is. Whether it's the postal people who work for the post office should come and even make it a place that it would be a monumental place where people can come and fix it back up and make it a real home. It'll probably take about $500,000 right now to fix this thing up the way it needs to be fixed up. But they'd rather let it rot.